looking for Hector?
Yes, sir.
Everyone knows everyone around here. Theodore.
If it isn't little Theodore. I've been looking for you. You've been staying with that old man, haven't you? He's a drunk, Theo. And he's gonna drink himself to death.
I'm the hardest worker you ever see. Fastest worker too.
Do you know what your name means in Greek? God's gift.
Olivia doesn't need the money, Hector. She needs you.
Am I messing it up already?
No! The only way you can mess it up is to stop trying.
You'll be back working for me in no time. I'll make you regret it. Ever. Have a good night, Theo. And sweet dreams.
That's the trailer for The Aegean. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Cinema Australia podcast. My name is Matthew Eales. In this episode, I'm joined by the Aegean writer, director and co-producer Jacob Richardson to discuss his sweeping and ambitious new film. The Aegean follows Hector, a widowed Greek fisherman who feels the weight of his age in a world that has started to forget him. Everything changes when he meets Theodore, a resourceful, sharp, and endlessly positive teenager desperately seeking a saviour to rescue him from a dire situation. United by their shared struggles, they embark on a journey on the enchanting Aegean Sea, where they discover a newfound purpose and a reason to carry on. Jacob Richardson is an Australian filmmaker whose award-winning work has made international headlines. Jacob's first short film, Salt of the Earth, about the Australian inventor of chicken salt, premiered at the Adelaide Film Festival. Jacob currently has a slate of other feature projects in development. The Aegean is in cinemas from May 15 and I highly recommend checking it out, especially in a cinema if you can. Anyway, enjoy. Jacob Richardson, thank you for joining the Cinema Australia podcast. It's great to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me. Been exciting.
You're welcome. Congratulations on this film. I've seen it twice now, and I find it to be such a beautiful film. On each viewing, I've found it to be a meditative experience as we spend time with these two main characters who are both straightforward in their present, yet complex in their past. I've really enjoyed this film the times that I have seen it. So congratulations again. You should be very proud of it.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. No, it's very, as you say, it's very meditative, interesting, I suppose, film to sort of dive into and sink into, let wash over you if we can get the sort of sea pun started already. But yeah, no, it's definitely a sort of movie that I think is probably a little bit they don't make as much of anymore as well. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, that's very true. And I do have some questions about that. And, especially modern filmmaking in this streaming world that we find ourselves in. So I'm looking forward to discussing some of those elements with you as well. But the film played at the Brisbane International Film Festival late last year before it was put forward for actor consideration, which is where I caught it for the first time, actually. It's now May and you're preparing for its release. Can you give us a bit of a background on the film's journey post-production up until now?
Yeah, definitely. It's been, as I said, it's, we finished production. Oh, when we finished production? Would have been end of 2023. And then we went into editing it for about 6 months. And then we started sort of a festival circuit, applying to different festivals, that sort of thing. We got into Brisbane International Film Festival, which is great. We had our world premiere there. We had our premiere there at the same time as it was the same weekend actually. We were also in the Greek Film Festival here in Australia, which played in Melbourne and Sydney. So it was one big weekend of like 1,000+ people going to see the film around the country. It almost felt like sort of an opening weekend cinema release sort of thing, but it was just so happened that they fell on the same sort of dates, and that was really fun to get to go and experience it with two very different, I suppose, audiences. And then for the weekend after, it played in the Greek Film Festival again up in Brisbane, and we got to experience it in the same venue that we held the Brisbane Film Festival screening, but this time with the Greek Film Festival audience. And as someone who's gone to those festivals for years, it was actually quite interesting to be on the other side and get to experience what the different audiences were like for those festivals.
Yes.
And then subsequently to that, we got into another film festival in Canada that's coming up later in the year. But in the meantime, we've been focusing on working with our distributor here in Australia, Radioactive, to get it ready for cinema release here in Australia. And it's going to come to cinemas next week, May 16. And then after that, it's going to come to VOD here in Australia. So we're really excited to be able to get a lot more people to see it, I suppose, particularly because, when it came in those festivals, we had a lot of experiences with people saying, "Oh, I'm away that weekend, or I'd love to go and see it." And a lot of people who love the movie went and told their friends about it, and they were like, "Well, where can they go and see it?" And now they get to go and see it.
Yeah, yes. And not everyone does realize just how long it can take for a film to go from the festival circuit to its release. It can be quite a long time. But I just want to go back to what you were saying about the difference in those two audiences from the Brisbane International Film Festival to the Greek Film Festival. I'm assuming that there was a difference in response to the film, considering the theme of the Greek Film Festival and this movie.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit. I think if you're going to see a movie at the Brisbane Film Festival or the Adelaide Film Festival, or the Sydney or Melbourne Film Festival, I think you have that cinephile lens a little bit more. And when you're going to go see it at the Greek Film Festival, oftentimes, you may very well still have the same lens, but I think it also draws in that audience of people who love Greek cinema in the same way that the French Film Festival draws in that audience of people who love French cinema. Same with the German. And, for us, it was very interesting to get to spend time doing a Q&A in the same spot with both of those audiences and sort of seeing what the different questions were like. There were a lot, I think at the Brisbane Film Festival, we had a lot of questions about the making of the film and how we did it. At the Greek Film Festival, there were a lot of questions about the lead characters, particularly Costas Mandylor's Hector, and a lot of the Greek audience in particular. I think they related a lot in their lives to characters like that. I get a lot of times from Greek audience members, they always say, "Oh, I know someone just like that," And a lot of the cast that we spoke to when we were casting the film, the Greek cast, they were like, "Oh," they were surprised. To read the script and to find a character that they were like, that's so in their mind encapsulated someone that they know. And I think that was, that was really gratifying. But also, yeah, I mean, there's obviously also at the Greek Film Festival, a lot of those questions where it's like, oh, from people who had been in Kithra, who had grown up in Kithra, for example, where we shot the film, asking us, oh, did you go to this beach? Or did you go to this restaurant? So a lot more specific as well.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting to hear you say all of that because hopefully I've got a good mix of questions here for you, filmmaking wise and location wise, and hopefully it's a good mix for you. But you did mention that the film is being distributed by Radioactive, and as well as running Cinema Australia, I also run the WA Made Film Festival over here in Western Australia. And the number one question that I get asked about from filmmakers is how to navigate the Australian distribution system. And it's often quite a hard question to answer because it can be such a fickle beast. But yeah, the film is being distributed by the excellent folk at Radioactive. But what was your experience like securing a distributor for this film? Can you offer our filmmaking listeners any advice?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough landscape to secure a distributor, particularly theatrically anyway. There's so much has changed in the time even that prior to doing this film, or even still, I do a lot of film reviews, and we have our sort of film review magazine that we do here in Brisbane. And even see, sometimes I was talking to someone about this the other day. Sometimes you can't even tell if you're going to those previews that the audiences have dipped in theaters.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure you get the same. You go along to a movie preview screening of the latest Marvel movie or something. It's exactly as well attended at the preview screening as it was 8 years ago. But, if you go, my partner Ada and I, who also produced the movie, the other day, it was last year sometime, we walked over to Dendy Portside and we went to see a screening of Kevin Costner's Horizon.
Oh, yeah.
And we were the only people in the cinema for 3 hours. We're the only people in the entire theater complex, like it's often a lot more challenging, I think, to get that handle on it when you're reviewing films all the time. And I think going through that process for us of finding a distributor has been about, we talk to a lot of distributors. We talk to a lot of them even before going over to film the project. We're lucky enough to, both Ada and I have been doing film reviews for a while, so we have some contacts in the industry from that perspective. We had a producer on board originally, Georgina Stegman, and she had a lot of contacts in the distribution world. So we were able to speak to a lot of people, show them the script, that sort of thing. But it's also a challenging script to sell, I suppose. It's not the next big, Marvel movie or the next big Jason Statham movie or something like that. Like there's no original IP here. There's no IP we're building off here. It's an original story. And it's also a story that is fundamentally pretty art house, right? It's a movie where the lead character doesn't speak for a lot of it. It's a movie with a young unknown in Nicky Dune. So yeah, I suppose it is a challenge to find a distributor, particularly in this day and age. And it's not just for small indie cinema; it's for everything. And it's tough to find a distributor who will put it in theaters if that's important to you. But there are a lot more channels open as well. There's VOD, there's all of these different channels where people are being able to see the movie. And I think that for us, it was about finding the right partner who understood that we wanted to be shown in theaters. That was a big goal of mine. We wanted to make sure we were coming to cinemas. But at the same time, the goal of any project is getting it out and getting it seen. And, I had that same experience with the last short film I did, which was a documentary. And I remember I was editing it for like a year. And eventually my dad said to me, it's like, you just got to stop editing this. You got to get it out, right? Because there's no point just editing it all the time. Eventually you have to show someone. So I would say, the landscape, as much as it's, it's tough in theaters at the moment, it's also a great landscape because there are a ton of great smaller distributors around and a ton of them who we reached out to and we liked a lot of them. A lot of them liked the film, and we just felt like with Radioactive, we had a partner who was close to home and someone who was going to treat the film right. I'm just thinking as well about another distributor we talked to who did our cinematographer's last film, Big Dog, and they were great too. And another small distributor who's getting great Australian films out there, Pivot Pictures, and just because obviously our cinematographer was from WA as well.
Yes, I've got some questions about that too.
Yeah. So, no, I think it's, for those people who are making their films and it's coming to your film festival, it's just about continuing to be persistent and to reach out, but also to recognize that the goal is getting people to see it. So whichever channel you can get it out and get people to see it, it's a success.
Yeah. So, how willing were you to pick a distributor that if a distributor said to you, "We can't get this into cinemas, we can only get it onto streaming services," were you willing? Were you willing to accept that?
It depends at the time, I suppose. The time at which you're doing it. When you first make a film or you first conceive of a film, you imagine. Like that's before you show anyone the film. And I think that, the market ultimately decides where they want to see it. For us with this movie, we were lucky enough to have someone who came along and said, yeah, well, I think this deserves to be seen in theaters. And that was great for us. But yeah, it's a bit of a hypothetical, I suppose, for me to say whether or not about the overseas. But I think potentially overseas, that is something we would entertain. Is it going to VOD? It also depends on the platform. Even when we're in Greece and we were speaking to Greek distributors, the theatrical landscape over there is very different and the way they consume content over there is very different. Like theaters aren't as big of a thing. There's not as much indie content coming to theaters there. And so that experience, even in and of itself, really taught me a lot about the Australian cinema landscape and how lucky we are that we do have a ton of Australian independent cinema that comes to our theatrical distributors, that comes to our theatre screens. And there are a bunch of great Australian indies that are currently playing in theatres and are playing in theatres over the next month or so. And, they might not be out there for long or on many screens, but there are plenty of theatres that are showing them. So it's good to get out there and see them when you can.
Yeah, and if there are any listeners out there who are listening to me say this, I urge everyone to see it in a cinema, because this is where it deserves to be seen. It really does deserve to be seen on the big screen. I am looking forward to getting stuck into talking about the film, but as I do with this podcast, I like to go back to a filmmaker's earlier years. You just mentioned there that you write for your own publication. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I've had a pretty weird way into doing film. But, I studied engineering and finance at university. So I have a double degree in that. And I left university and was doing film. I was doing, project management and consultancy. And I had a friend of mine who used to work at Channel 10, and he would often invite me to these free movie previews that they would get. And then eventually he frustratingly moved to Canada. And so I thought there's got to be some way for me to continue getting to see these films early. And that's sort of the impetus then for writing film reviews. And we started and we just happened to take off with it, I suppose. So since 2016, we've been writing film reviews. We've had our online film magazine called Film Focus, which has been going great. And as part of that, that's also how I got into then videography and film, because as part of that sort of channel, I would go along to the film premieres and I would do like a little wrap up video at the time of whatever the red carpet was looking like or that sort of thing, an event video, and I would put it up online. And I'm not sure if Perth is the same, but here in Brisbane, a lot of the distributors don't have like a dedicated PR person from their team. They'll contract it out to a PR firm. And a lot of those PR firms had other clients. And so they would see the work we would do there and they'd be like, oh, that could also be really useful for my other client. And so that started getting me hired doing a lot of videography work. And that was probably 2016, 2017. And then by the time I got to 2020, it was sort of big enough that I was considering just doing that full time and leaving my project management consultancy job, which I did. Obviously, COVID hit then. So it was a double whammy. But yeah, I mean, the videography stuff really took off. And at the same time, I thought I'd try my hand at making a documentary. And so I made my first short documentary. And then that went on to play the Adelaide Film Festival. And then immediately after that, I thought, well, what I really want to make is a feature-length film. So I started writing the Aegean.
Yeah, and you've just answered a few of my next questions there as well, which is great. But did working in that corporate space provide enough of a creative outlet for you as a creative, or did it only feed your hunger to create and make your own work?
It's a bit of both, really. In one sense, the work I was doing there was I would write business cases, and business cases are sort of like big assignments, right? Like they're just sort of like telling why a project is a good project. And, I did always have the issue that they're meant to be written very stale and very, very unequivocal. And oftentimes when I sent them through, particularly because I was writing film reviews in the evening, I would come in during the day and I would write a business case that's meant to be very objective, and it would be full of a ton of adjectives that I would use in a film review, and it would come back with a bunch of red pen on it and I'd have to fix it up. But yeah, at the same time, there's both storytelling, right? So I really enjoyed that work because it was still telling a story. You were still trying to convince someone or compel someone to feel something about this project. And I always did find the same thing. And on top of that, as a project management consultancy. So I was learning a lot of project management skills that really came in handy when I was doing videography and then eventually when I went to make the films. But yeah, obviously, there was something missing for me, which was being able to spend my time doing the thing that I love the most.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned your education there. Was filmmaking a part of that, or where does that come into your formal education?
No, I never studied film. I mean, I did study a little bit of film on exchange in Dublin. I took a few film courses, much to the chagrin of my university, who said, now only one of the courses you're over there for counts. You have to come back. And we juked it out for a while, and then they let me just do it anyway and extended my degree. But yeah, that was the only experience I had really of studying film was over there in Dublin. Here in Australia, I never studied film at university. I just sort of was self-taught and a lot of I suppose, learning on the job as well.
Mm. What self-taught avenues did you take? Was it a lot of reading, a lot of YouTube? What was that?
Yeah, a lot of reading and a lot of YouTube up front. I did know a number of people who uh, did study film and are still in the film industry and still working in different areas. Some work in Canada, some in New York. We actually had a dodgeball team for a while, which was great. And it was a very tough dodgeball team because when Khan came around, the whole team other than me would be in Khan and it'd be 1 against 6. Um, but yeah, I think it was largely a lot of self-teaching from, I suppose, YouTube, and then also just getting out and keeping the camera with me whenever I could. I mean, I would take my camera everywhere, and I think increasingly, even still I do, but increasingly I would take bigger and bigger cameras everywhere. I remember walking around in Italy into different museums and things recently with my red Komodo and this giant cinema lens, and they would say, "Oh, you can't take the bag in," and I would say, "Okay, can I take my camera in?" And they would say, "Yeah, you can take the camera, you just can't take the bag." And the only thing in the bag is this, 15-kilo camera or something.
Yes, yeah.
And so you pull it out. Anyway, I think just having the camera in the hands a lot of the time was a big teacher for me. And I go back and I watch some of the stuff I used to make in my first days videographing, and it's not good, but at the time I think the landscape was again very different also on where those videos were going. Social media wasn't the same that it is now. The quality expected wasn't the same that it is now on social media. And still, you look at some of the stuff they're doing now on socials, it's crazy. It's crazy. But yeah, I suppose just getting out there and doing it was what helped me.
How young were you when you picked up your first camera? Do you remember that moment?
I have like a vague memory of making like a stop motion film when I was 12 with a camera and like a couple of Dragon Ball Z figurines. But other than that, it would have been, I suppose, when I went to Dublin in 2016, where that was really where I started like filming some stuff that was a little bit more artistic. But yeah, that's probably it. 2016 is really when I intentionally started to pick up a camera.
So take us back to Salt of the Earth because this film really blew up at the time of its release, and it had some serious media attention. I remember that's when I first heard about you as a filmmaker. You must be thrilled with how that film was received at the time. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, it was really cool. I think it was, even when I think back now, one of the things that sticks out to me the most about it was it went on to have such great success. As you said, it got so much media attention. It was on like the BBC World News. It played a ton of film festivals. It eventually sold to Qantas. And before it got into the Adelaide Film Festival, which is where it had its premiere, I applied for 2 film festivals, and one was the West End Film Festival, and one was the Adelaide Film Festival. And the first thing I got was a rejection from the West End Film Festival.
Wow.
And then to see it go on and have such success, I remember at the time thinking, like, just being distraught and heartbroken when I got that first rejection. And then I saw an article about another filmmaker who was judging a competition, I think up like in the Ipswich Film Festival or something, like a much smaller film festival, up in like sort of above me in northern Queensland. And it said that her last film had been in 19 film festivals or something like that.
Wow.
And my first thought was that even if I hit 100% of the film festivals I've submitted to, I would not have 19. I would only have 2.
Yes.
So even like that started cluing me into the fact that, it wasn't necessarily always about the quality of the film or what the film was about. It was about, for film festivals in particular, it's about program, and it's about, does this fit in the program? Does this match with everything else we're doing? And so, yeah, that's sort of already started to change my mind in terms of sort of strategic thinking around getting a film out there. Obviously, then it got into the Adelaide Film Festival, which is great. And, we had a bunch of fun doing that and going down there. And I think it was a great film festival down there. We had a good time. And it was also cool to get to show the subject of the documentary, Peter, to get to show his story on the big screen and to see it with him and to see how it affected him. He's a stoic old uh, Australian guy, and it doesn't shed a tear easily, but certainly shed a tear then. And so that was very special too.
I absolutely love that. And you've offered some really good advice there about the film festival selection process, because I know that it is quite disheartening for filmmakers when they are rejected from filmmakers, but there's so many factors into being accepted into a film festival, and sometimes you really just have to accept that. So really at the end of the day, then what would you attribute the success of this film to? Do you think that it was the subject matter itself or the PR behind it, or was it just because it was such a great doco?
The thing about it was that it got into a festival that it was designed best to get into, right?
Yes.
Like you could try for Cannes with Salt of the Earth. It's not going to get into Cannes. They don't know chicken salt in France, right?
Yes.
They got no interest in it. With this one, it's about an Adelaide person. It's set in Adelaide. It's shot in Adelaide. So already it's primed for the Adelaide Film Festival above, say, the Melbourne Film Festival or the Brisbane Film Festival. But then on top of that, it does have a very zeitgeisty, I suppose, concept, the sort of thing that's going to play well on social media with the chicken salt. I mean, you mentioned the PR, like the PR for that film was non-existent. It was an email from me to a list that maybe 5 or 6 years before that, a PR agent had sent out and mistakenly CC'd instead of BCCing everybody. And I saved it at the time, and I said to myself, I'm going to be able to use this list one time.
Yeah.
And I used it for that. And, it just so happened that it caught a bunch of it. Actually only caught one response at the time, which was from the ABC. And Rebecca Livingston at the ABC, she had me in, and I still attribute all the success that film had largely to her taking a chance on us and speaking to us on the radio, because then they put an article out about it, and then it suddenly blew up. And they talk about the phone ringing off the hook. I'd never experienced it before until that moment where the second that article came out, that whole day was just phone call after phone call. It was crazy. But it also, I suppose, gives you a crazy viewpoint on PR. Like that doesn't happen usually. That's not a usual thing to happen, to then go and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to get that for my next project or whatever. You're probably not. Like the amount of media we got from that one email that I just happened to send out and that one article and interview from the ABC was more than, you'd struggle to even pay for that amount of media. It was crazy. So of course it can. If it's a zeitgeisty topic, it may well generate its own press. But I think at the end of the day, it comes down to, from a film festival perspective, the benefit for the Adelaide Film Festival was that it was an Adelaide story.
Yes.
And I think that's what made the most sense. With your film festival, a WA story, it's probably going to have more appeal than a local Brisbane story.
That's right.
That being said, if there's incredible film that's a Brisbane story, I'm sure you're not going to turn it down.
No,
but it just depends on, looking at the strength of your film and trying to align it with, what a festival programmer is going to see benefit in.
I love it. That's some great stories that you've just told there. So here we are with the Aegean. As I can't praise the film enough, as I said in the intro there, I really loved it, and I really did enjoy it more the second time that I watched it as well. Can you take us back to the origins of this story, and how much did your original idea for this film adapt over time, or is what we see on screen how it was always intended to be?
It did sort of change over time. I suppose the first time I thought of it, it was just in the context of my own experience with my grandfather, who had lost my grandmother and was going through the process of, I suppose, grief in that period of loss. And I wanted to do something that tied into my understanding of our relationship and sort of how small, meaningful interactions can draw someone back to life a little bit, and the complexities of all of that. And so obviously I thought of that firstly, and then afterwards I started thinking about where to set it. I always had in my mind this concept of I had an intro sequence that I had in my mind at first, and I had this sort of ending sequence where he's on the boat, and I mean you've seen the film, so you know there's something with the casting some pills into an ocean, and those two scenes I had in my mind right from the start, and then uh, it was really about filling in the middle and how we get from one point to the next. Um, and so then I started looking at where I might set it as well. That was really important to me. And I was speaking to a Greek guy I know called Peter Souris, and we were speaking about, he recommended this island of Kythera when I sort of explained the story and the themes of the story. And when I looked into it, it just seemed perfect to me. It was a perfect location that really exemplified the concepts of loneliness and isolation that I wanted to get across in the film. Um, and so then once I set it there, I started to get a little bit more of an understanding about how to flesh out that story and how to get Hector from the starting sequence that I had an idea of to that ending sequence. And that was then bringing in the character of Theodore, um, and sort of infusing it with the character traits of a lot of people that I know, myself, my partner, a lot of other people that I know as well, and bringing both of those to life in a natural way. But, even still, there was still things that we were changing in future drafts of the script that one of the things we changed a lot was around the depiction of Theodore as a refugee. Not to jump too far ahead, but we did speak with the UNHCR over in Greece, and we had a good call with them on Zoom talking about the refugee crisis there and getting a handle on, how best to represent that, and also what the reality was for refugees over there. And one of the things that they were speaking to me about that really stood out to me was this concept of depicting these refugees as more than just the circumstance that has happened to them. And so that really led me to go back and rewrite Theodore a little bit to take the focus off that as much as was in the first pass on the script, and really focus instead on defining him as a character and him as an individual, not just him as a refugee. And so to that end, now Theodore is this sort of bubbly, buoyant personality who loves reading, he loves exploring the island. He's got all these, incredible traits to him that maybe in the first pass of the script weren't there because we were too focused on, some of the things that had happened to him.
And I do have some questions about that, but I just want to stick with your grandfather for a moment there, if you are happy to talk about this, because you've said that the film was a deeply personal experience guided by your own family and in particular your grandfather. Can you share a bit more with us about that and what your relationship was like with your grandfather?
Yeah, well, I mean, my grandfather's still here, so he has seen the film. He gave it one of his prized. I used to see movies with my granddad all the time, particularly when I was studying at university, and him and my grandmother were real sources of comfort, I suppose, to me at that time, because I wasn't obviously, I had this desire to go to film, but I was studying engineering and finance, and that was always a little bit of a, what am I doing with my life sort of thing. And so going during the week to see a movie with them was always something that brought me joy. And when my grandmother passed away, he he just stopped coming to movies. He didn't want to go to see a movie anymore. He sort of quietened down a lot, sort of shut down, many elements of his life. And it was sort of tough to get him to go see anything or to do that. And so I was really trying for many years to try and draw him out to go and see a film again. I have subsequently been able to get him to go see a movie or two. I think the first one he came back for was I called him and left a message about Top Gun Maverick. And he said, I will go see that one, Jake. I will go see that. But yeah, back in the day, he used to have only very, very little words for any film. And I think the character of Hector really, I tried to convey his propensity for very few words as well. But Grandpa used to say it was either rubbish, not bad, or a good show. They were the only three rankings, So it was good to have him come out of the Aegean and say it was a good show.
Yes. Did you include your grandfather in the development of Hector personally? Did he help shape the character in any way?
No, not really. Like I didn't sit down and work through the script with him. It was just more so taking him as inspiration for the character, and then our relationship as inspiration for the setting. I think, the character itself of Hector became. I always use it as a guiding light, Grandpa, but at the same time, once you give it to Costas and you give it to an actor, they then start to infuse it with their own thing. So no, I never really sat down with Grandpa and worked through whether or not he thought it was an authentic representation of himself, but
Yes.
I'm sure he doesn't. But I think, I think it's, it definitely was that sort of north light, that guiding light for me.
Yeah, yeah. And so he gave the film two thumbs up. He liked it.
Yeah, he loved
Yeah,
it.
that's
So
great.
that was good. Good to have him. We had him at the Brisbane Film Festival premiere, which was great, and good to see him there. And yeah, these days we've sort of got him back into Ada, and I now have him over every fortnight to watch a classic old film, one of the ones that he used to like. So we do that instead of going to the cinema a lot of the time.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So you just mentioned Costas there. What drew you to his casting? He has this incredibly extensive filmography with something like 30 films currently in pre or post
Yeah.
production as well, or nearing release. Was there a
Yeah.
particular reason that you wanted Costas for this role?
One thing that we really came around to, I suppose, in floating different ideas for the cast was that we wanted to make sure that all of the characters, other than Theodore, had Greek heritage or were Greek actors. And so we were looking to cast someone who was of a certain age or could play a certain age and also had Greek heritage. So, that sort of does limit the list a little bit. Um, and, Costas was obviously on that list, and we spoke to a number of different actors about the role, both actors who were in the US, actors who live in Australia, actors who are just living in Greece and working in Greece as well. But the thing that really stood out to me about Costas was his voice. And, that character doesn't speak for so long. When he does speak, you really want it to hit hard.
Yeah.
And when I spoke to Costas, and I remember just talking to Ada afterwards about it, and I was just like, the voice is just perfect for that moment. And it was. And Costas, on top of that, had that sort of passion for the project and the passion for, going back to Greece and taking his daughter and his wife to Greece as well and showing them his ancestral homeland. So it wound up being a really great collaboration. And I think, for me as a first-time filmmaker as well, working with Costas and having someone who was so generous with his time, like even still, Costas is so supportive of this film. He loves this film, and he will do anything about to do with this film. We were constantly talking about it, and he'll call me or we're texting about it. And I think that's a really great sign that the lead actor is that engaged and is willing to help out. Particularly for me, it was a great sense of comfort as well, because obviously I'm first time feature filmmaker. Having someone in your corner who, as you say, has that huge, extensive filmography. I mean, the man has worked with the Coen brothers. He's worked with Zemeckis. He's worked with a ton of the big name directors. And he's also worked on some other stuff with some directors who probably are no longer making films. But that's what happens when you make that many movies. But he, I just found him to be so generous with his time and with his advice. And he was just a real team player. So I was really happy when we got over there and we were doing it, that it was like, okay, well, great. We've got a fantastic lead actor here, because not only is he doing a good job on screen, but off screen, he's holding the team together.
You're listening to the Cinema Australia podcast on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or at cinemaaustralia.com.au.
I want to stick with Costas for a moment because his character Hector, as you've said, has very little dialogue in the film, which I found to be quite beautiful. It's a pleasure to watch someone of his acting caliber express so much of his character through physicality rather than dialogue. As a director, is it more of a challenge to direct a character without dialogue compared to a character like Theodore who has quite a bit of dialogue?
Uh, it can be. It can be. And I think it's a big challenge to rehearse with that person. Because what is there to rehearse, particularly, at the start, he's in Portugal or America or wherever he is, happens to be that week, and I'm here in Australia. With Nicky, we were able to sit down and run a bunch of Zoom rehearsals with him and work through the dialogue, and really make sure that the dialogue was coming across right. But with Costas, it was a lot more about getting to the intentionality of the character, I suppose, and the history of it. One of the things about the script as well is the process of writing the script. Originally, sometimes it had more background on Hector, sometimes it had less as it went through different iterations.
Yeah.
And there was lots of stuff that just never made it to the script that was just in my head that I was like, okay, this is why he has that, or whatever that might be in the script. This is why he has it. I have a reasoning in my head because I'm writing the script, but it might not fit in the script. So Costas and I spent a lot of time sort of delving into what those things were, what I was thinking about the character, what happened to him previously, all this stuff, so that when Costas got on set, he could really focus on channeling that through the eyes or through, the performance or what he's looking at or how he's moving. And then, yeah, on set, we spent a lot of time. I think the great thing about Costas and I was we worked really well together in terms of doing a few different takes. Obviously, we had a limited budget, we had a limited time out there as well. And not just because of the budget, but also because of external factors. The island closes down for winter. So for us, it was about making sure we could get a couple of different options and make sure we got the one I wanted, and then also played around a little bit, but at the same time making sure we were moving pretty quick. And so Costas really helped us with that. And one of the things Costas would do a lot of was we would run a scene and he would perform it, sort of, and end a scene or a sequence, and he would perform it in a way where as he's performing, he's sort of escalating up the performance. So if we cut it at a certain point, it sort of ends with that. But if he wants to try something different, he might run the back half of that scene right at the end again, or he might, do something like, if he's ramping up for something that's a little bit more out there, he'll put it towards the end, or he'll give us a good pause where our editor can cut it if we need to. Yeah. And I think that was really helpful because sometimes it really worked. And when it really didn't, we were able to, cut it in post without having to worry about doing a full another take on set. And so I think Costas really worked well for us there.
What an absolute treat, and what a pleasure it must have been for you to work with somebody so experienced on your first feature film.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, the stories as well were crazy because he was staying like maybe it was like 40 minutes or an hour away from where we were staying.
Right.
And because the whole island is sort of dotted with these pockets of town, and then there's big expanses of beautiful Grecian island between them. And so in the morning we would start, and as having seen the film, writing my first film, I didn't realize how challenging it'd be to set pretty much everything at sunrise or sunset. But that's sort of what we did, which means that we were shooting pretty much every sunrise or sunset. And on a sunrise day, I would go pick up Costas from his place about 40 minutes away, and then we would drive 40 minutes back to the set. And the stories you would get from Costas, at 5 a.m. before the sun rose about his days in Hollywood, which is wild. So that was an added benefit of working with him.
Oh, I bet you could probably write a book on the amount of stories that you were given.
Yeah, probably. I'm not sure it would clear the publisher.
Before I do get on to Nicky, I've got a bit of a filmmaking question here for you because, and it's more of an opinion question actually, because I recently heard Pete Davidson talking on a podcast where he talks about being instructed by Amazon, I think it was, to write a script as if the viewer is looking at TikTok or Instagram while they're watching the movie at home. So they're instructed to write characters repeating the names of who they're talking to, so the viewer doesn't actually have to look up from their phones and they can follow the film without actually watching it. How does a statement like that make you feel as a filmmaker with obvious artistic integrity who's willing to make a film like the film that you've made, where the viewer has to actually engage with it? How does a statement like that make you feel?
I mean, it's just it's the way of the world at the moment, isn't it? I think, I saw the same quote, and I
Okay,
saw the
great.
same quote recently. I saw a similar quote actually recently from Ted Sarandos, who runs Netflix, who
Yeah.
was speaking about the fact that like something to do with the fact that like the cinema experience was outmoded or
Yes.
something,
Yes.
and like now it was all like the way the future is Netflix. And I think, you know, if Netflix ever wanted to really make that statement count, it's a movie like this that is a thing that works in a cinema that might not work on Netflix, right?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
this is the sort of movie you need to prove on Netflix or on, those streaming services that you can still make a film like this work, because it isn't a movie where you can necessarily be on your phone during it. It's not like, it's not Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. You're not going to miss like huge plot points going on,
Yeah.
but it is a movie that benefits from you immersing yourself in it. And, one distributor we talked to early on, we sent the film to, and they said, oh, it didn't grab me in the first 10 seconds. And I was like, yeah, the first 2.5 minutes are like a big sweeping opening credit sequence, which we shot all in one take. And it's just completely at night, sort of our tribute to like old glamour Hollywood.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not going to grab you in the first 10 minutes. There's no it's not like a trailer for the rest of the film, like some of these other films are.
Yeah.
So, I think reading something like that, it can be challenging because you think, okay, I've got to go make my thing like that.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's necessarily the case, though. I think there are still audiences out there who are getting tired or already tired of that same sort of like formulaic, sort of all grey, made for, as Pete Davidson said, made for watching while you're cooking or watching while you're scrolling TikTok. That sort of content works sometimes. I'm not saying I don't watch that content. Of course I do. I mean, I wrote this script while I was watching, a particularly fantastic season of Love Island,
Yes.
where I don't think at the time I watched a single moment of it on the screen, but I got the story because I was listening.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it is something where you listen to it and it's sort of a bit disheartening, but at the same time, I don't think that the audiences have gone away who like this stuff. And one of the most compelling points to that, I suppose, is I went to see, I don't know if you saw the movie, I think it was called Touch. It was like a Swedish movie, and it was like, two different time periods, and it was a really beautiful romantic story. But I remember I went to see it, maybe it was late last year. Ada and I went to see it at Palace James Street, and the whole cinema was packed. And it's not a movie that, I think is going to blow up the Netflix charts or whatever. But the cinema was packed. People wanted to go and see that movie. Maybe they don't want to go and see the thing that in a cinema that, you could watch also while scrolling on TikTok at home.
Yeah.
But there are, if you make a movie that is going to resonate with people, I think the audiences are out there, and there are audiences who are seeking out that kind of stuff. So, I think that we're still in a moment where we're still trying to find our feet a little bit in terms of distributors finding what the right channel is for those sorts of films, and audiences finding where they can see those sorts of films and still get the same experience that they love. With streaming, encroaching, and at the same time, streaming being able to find a way to give audiences both. So I don't know where it'll turn up. And, who knows now also with these tariffs coming on, if they come on.
That's right.
There's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. But as a filmmaker, you can't be stressing about whether or not people want to see that.
No, that's right. And I don't want to tell people what to do, but turn your bloody phones off when you're watching a movie at home, folks, and get engaged. But
Yeah.
back to the film itself, I mentioned Nicky earlier. He's quite a revelation here, and he and Costas have a great chemistry. Did you do chemistry tests during the casting process, or did his casting come about in any particular way?
Nicky's casting came through. We did like a broad casting call. Originally, we had someone in mind that we thought would be great, but we just started to hit all of these roadblocks. I think it's an interesting character to cast because it's written relatively young. It could sort of be between, between anywhere between 11 or 12 or up to 16, 17, 18. Um, and so for us, we had someone in mind originally, but then once you were interacting with his agent, uh, he only spoke French, I think. So we would need a translator on set. Plus, he was so young. You have issues then with doing school on set. So all of that led to the point where, it just wasn't going to work with him. So we went back out for a broader casting call. And again, it's another role where, if we were casting like a 30-year-old woman and a 30-year-old man, we would have had so many more options, right?
Yes.
We're casting, someone who can convincingly play like a young refugee. And so you're looking at actors who are young, who don't have as many credits, right? Just by virtue of their age, and trying to work out who's going to be good. And there's just not as big a pool for that sort of stuff. Same as there's not as big a pool when you're trying to find a character who could play between 70 and 80 and it also has Greek descent. So you start to cut it down. For us, we put that casting call out and we got a bunch of applications. We got a ton from all around the world. And I remember I did both because we had one of our producers, Alyssa and Ada. They both texted me around about the same time. I was in a different country and they both texted me independently. They'd independently watched Nicky's tape. Wow. And within a minute of each other, they each texted me independently that we found the kid, right? And, I think that was a great sign as well. When I watched Nicky's tape, he had such a great read of the scene that we gave them to read. And then speaking with him and doing the work with him, he was so dedicated as an actor, which was amazing. And in terms of his and Costas's chemistry, a lot of that was built on the island. They came over on the same plane from mainland Greece, and then they spent a lot of time sort of having dinner, spending time together, that sort of thing. And the way we sort of structured the shoot was that we started a lot of the scenes with Nicky and the villain character, Christos, who's played by a Greek rapper called Light. And while that was happening, Costas was going out on a local fisherman's boat and learning, some of the tools of the trade out there. And then at the same time, that gave us sort of a week where they started to have the times when we weren't shooting to spend together and form that bond. So a lot of it was built on the island. We didn't have a lot of chemistry testing before going into the shoot.
Very lucky that it turned out so great. Theodore as a character is one that deserves to be treated delicately. And you did mention some of your research there, but what was the exact extent of your research into the refugee experience and how you've incorporated that here?
I mean, we did a lot of research. Obviously, a lot of desktop research is where you start with something like that.
Yeah.
And we did a lot of that as I was writing the script, and then on top of that. And that informed not just our depiction of Theodore, but also our depiction of, the Greek community, because that's the other side of the coin here. And then, as I said, we spoke to the UNHCR and we went back and forth with them for a little bit. And then we had a big wide-ranging Zoom with one of their Athens-based representatives who was dealing on the ground with that crisis all the time. And that was really informative as well. And then separately to that, we did have the opportunity also to meet with some Congolese refugees here in Brisbane and speak with them about their lived experience as well. So, those three things, I think, were the way that we got into the character and the story. And at the same time, we did also want to make sure that we were portraying it as you say, as sensitively as we can. And hopefully we've done that.
Was it an eye-opening experience for you during this research process, or did you find that you were more aware of it than you may have realized?
No, I think it was sort of an eye-opening experience, and I think it was, one of the things that is so, I suppose, heartbreaking about it is that, we would, because the writing process took a few months, and even now, you'd search the same terms and suddenly there'd be a new suite of articles because a very similar thing to the one you were looking at 2 weeks ago has just re-happened again. But no, I think that, for me, the most eye-opening thing was getting that opportunity to speak with the UN and really interrogate some of the issues that I suppose, you get obviously a very different perspective when you speak to someone versus you read a quote from them in an article in The Guardian or something. Getting, to speak with them for an extended period of time is something where you can really get to the heart of the matter, particularly when they know they're not going to be quoted in a newspaper. So, no, it was a very eye-opening experience. And I think also, the people we spoke to who had been through that experience, even if it wasn't necessarily to Greece itself, if it was, a similar experience but coming to Australia or something like that, it is a very traumatic event for a lot of them. And yeah, I suppose for me it was eye-opening. And a lot of that stuff sort of, they talk a lot about compassion fatigue. And that was something that we really wanted to, at some point, tease out a little bit, is that, like, what's great about the response is that it's an extended response, particularly when the problem or the crisis is an extended crisis, making sure that those initial flashes of compassion and those initial impulses to help are able to be sustained for a long time.
Was there a deeper meaning to Theodore's costuming color palette, or was it simply surface level? Was I reading too much into that?
Depends what you read into it.
It's mostly just the blue and white.
No, he always had, I mean, I'm not the best person to speak on it because we had an incredible costume designer or art director in general in Penelope Comino, who is from Kythera. And she did a great job, I think, with the costuming on both of them. Obviously, with Theodore, the goal was to give him that sort of like sea-ish colors and that indication. But at the same time, it is, that's something that we found shooting over there as well. Is like the limitations of shooting on a small Greek island is you only have access to so much stuff, right? You only have access to what you bring in a lot of the time. I mean, one time we had our sound recorders, his XLR cable broke, and we couldn't find an XLR cable anywhere else on the island except for I had bought one XLR cable with me, which happened to be 10 meters long, which is about 9 meters more than he needed. So for the rest of the shoot, he was just hanging around with 9 extra meters of XLR cable wrapped around his leg. But, like there's a lot of stuff over there you've got to think about when you are shooting on location that's so remote. In this case, it was about costuming, and I think Pip did a great job of being able to bring so much costume and so many options and be able to find something that Nicky felt comfortable in that also suited his body and his personality. And the other thing is making sure that costume is sort of making him feel like the right age in the script. In Nicky's case, I suppose we were aging him down a little bit from what he otherwise looked like generally. And with Costas, we were aging him up.
Yes. You mentioned the film's location there, and it does play a big part in this film, obviously. But the story really is a universal one, which could be told anywhere, I suppose, if you think about it. Were you willing to not shoot this film in this location and take it somewhere else if you had to, or were you determined to shoot it here?
I was willing to shoot it somewhere else originally. And originally I was thinking about, before I even lit on Kythera or Greece, I thought of, because fundamentally the guy was a fisherman, I wanted to give it that sort of vibe. And so my initial thoughts were Greece or Ireland. But then I did feel like Ireland, at the time in particular, I think, what had just come out? God, the name escapes me. The one with Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell, Banshees of Inisherin.
Yes.
And that had just come out. So Ireland was super popular and super, it was obviously going to be a hotbed of activity. And I just thought Greece had a different energy to it, and a different palette in particular. And then I was
Much
clued
more
onto this
sunshine.
island. Yeah, much more sunshine. And I was clued onto this island by a guy I really trust. So that sort of led me down this path. And once I saw the island in particular, once I found an island that was, I mean, Kythera has a number of shipwrecks around it, right? And some of those are in the film. And for me, that was so, not only did we have this opportunity to have the character who's been involved in a shipwreck interact with one on the shore, but they have this beautiful tanker, like a Russian oil tanker that has sunk just off the coast there. And it sort of juts out on a 45-degree angle. And so there's so many opportunities to be able to shoot that in the background. And for a character who is, traumatized by his experience in traveling across the ocean as a refugee, to have that sort of constant looming behemoth on the horizon, for me, thematically, that was such a great opportunity, and it really captured the imagination. But, there was also talk at some point about shooting it in Australia as well. I never felt like at that point the film was already set in Greece. The script had been done. I didn't feel like doubling Australia for Greece was an authentic way, I suppose, to tell the story. And yeah, I think once we were over there, that really, and subsequently as well, now the film's in post-production and release, I think that shines through. It's a location that I often say, like, the benefit of being over there is that if I wanted a shot of Greece, I could turn the camera on and point it anywhere and it would be a shot of Greece, right?
Yes,
I wouldn't have to, like here in Australia, go through all of the effort to turn, Stradbroke Island into Greece. So, there's so many benefits to shooting over there on location. And I think those benefits primarily come through when you're watching the film.
Yes,
When you watch the
definitely.
film and you see it, you're like, okay, well, this is, you could never get some of those big sweeping wide shots here in Australia without millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah. And I know that a filmmaker's relationships and personal connections to their crew is very important. How many local crew members how many Australian crew members did you take with you compared to ground crew who are already located there, if any?
Well, we took all of our crew really, other than some runners and, some general, local helpers, were either Australian, British, or Bulgarian.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is because, it is an indie film. The budget's not huge, but it is shooting on a beautiful small Greek island, right?
Yeah.
So that's appealing to people who aren't based in Greece, I suppose. For those crew who are in Greece, you're asking them to, hey, come work on this, small indie project that's shooting on this island that's 6 hours by ferry away from your home and your family, versus other people who may never have been to Greece and get to have that experience. And so as part of that, we wanted to make sure that when we were doing the scheduling, something I was proud of was that everyone got their weekends, so they could have Saturday and Sunday to explore the island and hang out. And even Costas, I was speaking to him yesterday, was saying one of his favorite memories was waking up in the little bay in Avlemanos where he was living and walking out the balcony and on a Saturday and seeing a few of the crew out there jumping off the cliff, doing cliff diving and jumping into the bay. And, that's, I think, the energy that was great to have by bringing people over, was that for everyone, it was both work and also a little bit of a trip. And that was really nice to have. I think also when you're making a film like that and when you're trying to capture a place, being a tourist in the place can be a real benefit. You start to see things with a little bit more wonder, I suppose, than you would if you live there. And that's something I tried to capture in the film as well. So, we brought, obviously, one of the people we brought over was Oliver Hay, WA-based cinematographer. And we work really closely on capturing a lot of those really amazing vistas. And I think he did a great job of that.
Yeah, and before I ask you about Oliver, I'm just wondering now, did you and AD get much time to experience the culture of Kythera while you were there as well, or was it all work for you?
Well, Ada didn't get a chance to come. Um,
Oh, okay, right. Sorry.
yeah, she worked because her work back here wouldn't let her take the time off. But
Right.
uh, no, well, one thing we did get to experience while we were over there was, I suppose, the culture of Kithera and get to meet a lot of the locals too, um, which I think was one of the great benefits of the project. And one of the other great things we had was our costume designer. I say costume designer slash art director because Pip really is on a small production like this. You're wearing so many hats. She was probably 6 or 7 other roles, right? And one of those was probably location scout because she had been to the island um, even the year before on a holiday, and so was able to give us all of these photos in advance of her trip there and be like, "Oh, these were cool spots that could be good locations." And um, so we got to see a lot of the stuff around there. And one thing she took us to was a paniri, which was great. We took the whole crew on the night they landed to a paniri. Um, one of the deals that our producer and first AD Alyssa did was with the owner of the boat, the hero boat in the film, and she did that deal with him over another panuri and fireside, cook and wine, meat and wine, thing that was going on one of the hills there in Kithera. So, it was a really lovely experience working with the community and having so many of them involved in the project. Obviously, some of them were going to be, you know, not aggrieved, but not that keen that a film was going to go and show this island. They were worried about more tourism coming in based on it.
Yes,
But
yes.
I think everyone we dealt with over there was incredibly nice and, couldn't have helped us more. So I think we were really lucky to get to work in a place like that.
Oh, it's so great to hear. You've mentioned Oliver now a few times, your cinematographer from Western Australia, of course. Can you tell us about your relationship with Oliver and what he brought to this film creatively? Because obviously you've seen Oliver's previous films as well, like The Big Dog and Bass and Dream, which is a much adored film over here.
hmm Yeah, Oliver's great. I think Ollie, he was keen to capture a little bit of that Grecian light and a little bit of that Grecian aspect over there. Um, what was great about Ollie was that what we really needed a cinematographer who was going to be able to work with our huge shot list and our limited times and have that level of reactivity and ability to innovate and work agile and fast. And Ollie is that sort of cinematographer, right? He can do so much in such a short amount of time. And he brought a lot to the film in that respect. And I think his work stands apart on the screen because of that. I mean, it's a gorgeous looking film, and a lot of that is down to Oliver's work, and not only Oliver's work behind the camera, but also working with me and giving those suggestions. He had that experience, as you say, from Bass and Dream and The Big Dog, and was able to give us a lot of tips in terms of, okay, how we might do this. Also in terms of the practical stuff. I mean, over there, from a practical perspective, over there, the light's very different to here in Australia. It's not as
Yes.
harsh,
Yeah.
which means different filters, and in our case, often no need for some ND filters. On top of that, we had the practicalities of shooting in a lot of places that required quite a walk. Oftentimes, there's one scene where there's a church that's like built into a cliff there, and you can drive up, but there's a ton of stairs up to the top. So to get up there, you don't want to get up there with a prime lens and realize, oh, I've got the 35. I wish I had the 28 or something, right? And you've got to walk back down another 1,000 steps, get the other lens back up. So once we got there, we worked through the equipment buy or the equipment hire that we were doing from Thessaloniki. And um, we had to make practical decisions about what types of lenses we were going to switch it to because of the space we were in. So we started preferencing some options that had a bit more, some more zooms in the kit. And a lot of that was down to Ollie and that sort of, that ability to think not just creatively, but practically. How is he going to be able to achieve the best for his work, given the constraints of the project? And, having someone like that on board was of great help to us.
Oh, yeah, and it's such a stunning film to look at as well. And for listeners out there who haven't seen The Big Dog and Bass and Dream, I really recommend seeking those two films out. I've got two more questions here for you before we wrap up. And this next question's a bit of a filmmaking question because I was curious to know about it. And there's a scene in the film where Hector visits a gravesite. Was that particular gravesite built for this film, or was it a real site? And if so, whose?
No, that was just a cemetery that was in Kithera. We got permission to shoot up there. I'm not sure exactly whose grave it was, but we obviously had to do things like make sure that we weren't showing names and that sort of thing. But for us, it was really about the setting. For that, I mean, it's an incredible gravesite, right? Like on top of the cliff there.
I want to be
looking
buried
over
there.
the bay. Yeah, it's a crazy, beautiful place. And it was actually quite a great day of shooting. We're up there. And one of the things that actually, even this is just classic like filmmaking challenges there was like a lot of those graves had like it was a perspex or maybe glass, like little presentation things above them. And the wind would rattle through, and so you'd be trying to film, and all these little glass things would be slamming back and forth, just creating this cacophony. So in the film, you've got Costas standing there, and he's looking so peaceful, and it looks so amazing. And then behind, you've got all the crew with like arms and legs outstretched, trying to hold these glass plates in place just for the take. And then when it finishes, they all sort of bring their arms and legs back in and breathe a sigh of relief. But it was an amazing spot to shoot in. I think, we just chose when we were up there. We just chose, I suppose, for the grave that he went to look at, the one that had that aspect. But I think there were about like 20 or 30 graves. There are quite a number of like really amazing looking cemeteries there in Kithera as well. That wasn't like it was the main cemetery or anything. There were quite a number that we actually went to inspect when we were location scouting. But this one, I mean, just from a visual perspective, was sort of unparalleled.
Yeah. I have a final question here for you, which I ask all my guests on this podcast. Have you seen any Australian films lately that have really stood out for you? Any that you've particularly enjoyed?
Yeah. I just watched one. I was down because I just came back from Japan, and the day after I came back, I went down to the opening night of the Gold Coast Film Festival, and I watched. It was called The Ballad of Wallace Island.
Yes.
By Robert Connolly, who obviously did The Dry, Force of Nature. And, that was like a lovely, lovely film, but it was a big film. It was a big film for sure.
Yeah.
But no, that was really great. I watched an incredible short film recently called Elastoplastic by a local Brisbane filmmaker, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are lots of great Aussie films that you get the chance to see often. Carnal Vessels.
Oh, yeah.
That's another one.
So good.
But yeah, and even like some of the short films, I think Die Bully Die I saw recently, which is really good.
Yeah.
I did actually I watched for the Brisbane International Film Festival. I was involved in watching all the short films and judging them.
Oh, wow.
Last year, and they sort of send them all to you in like one. They cut them all together, I suppose, in one big video file.
Yeah.
And for me, I hate horror films. I'm not a big horror film guy.
Wow.
So, we get invited to horror films as part of the film magazine. I skip them or I send someone else. And all the people up here, they know that. I'm not coming to that, And in this case, I remember I was watching the short films, and you can't really tell what each short film is until it starts because it's all in one big file. So
That's right,
I'm watching it, and we're like, let's do 3 or 4 before bed, and I get 4 horrors back to back, and I was like, I could not sleep that night. But I mean, they were all great if you love horrors. But for me, they were. I think one particularly good one was called Cooey. And that was a really cool one. But they were all very scary to me. Australian horror is great, but horror in general is not my bag. But
I have to ask you now before we wrap up, why?
Because it's too scary. It's just too scary.
Simply because it's too scary. But you're
It's
a
way too
filmmaker.
scary.
Surely surely you can imagine what's going on behind the camera. Does that play into it?
Oh, I try my best. I try my best. But, later on that night, I could probably trace it back to when when the movie If came out,
Yeah.
which I would consider a horror. Many people, I'm sure, would consider not a horror.
Yeah.
But the distributor, the guys from Roadshow, they sent us like a big box in the post, and it had a copy of the book and a big red balloon, like the If balloon, right?
Yeah.
And I remember we went to see the movie and then went back, and in the middle of the night, that balloon floated into our bedroom, and I woke up to this balloon just floating up there, screaming. So, yeah, maybe I could trace all the horror back to that. That was probably so traumatic an experience. I'm like, no, not again.
Absolutely love it. Jacob, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Cinema Australia podcast. I can't thank you enough for sharing your stories with us. Congratulations on the film, and I wish it all the best.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much for, everything you guys do for Australian film.
Thanks for listening. Find all the latest Australian film news at cinemaaustralia.com.au. You can follow Cinema Australia on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok.